I'd like to introduce Richard Koestner, who is a professor at McGill University in the Department of Psychology. So this year, Professor Koestner won the Canadian Psychology Association's Donald Head Award for Distinguished Contributions to Psychology as a Science. So that was in 2021. He has published over 125 papers, and recent work focuses on the importance of autonomy in the effective pursuit of personal goals. He conducts research on goal setting, self-regulation, and internalization processes. The title of his presentation right now is How Self-Determination Theory Can Help Us Provide Better Healthcare to Individuals, to Families and Communities, and it's understanding the benefits of collaborative autonomy. So thank you very much, Dr. Koestner, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carmen. I want to begin by saying thanks to you and Jacqueline and your whole team, because I can't believe you were able to put together such a wonderful conference. I've learned so much. I'll talk about that in a second here. Let's see. Okay, so here are some of the things I've learned. I had actually intended to review my talk this morning, but there were so many good new talks, and I learned so much about this organization and its relation to the federal government. But what I learned yesterday was that there's 4 linguistic constituencies in Canada from Dr. Bowen. It's not just French and English, but there's also Indigenous languages and there's heritage languages. I learned that there's a great amount and very sophisticated research on culture, language, and healthcare. I thought Andrew Ryder's talk yesterday was really fascinating about how inextricably linked mental health concepts are with language and how many problems can arise when we're talking to a health provider who speaks a different language or who only understands our language at a certain level. This morning, I learned about the amazing bibliographic resources through Koestner. I wish I knew about them before I started doing my community work. Now, the other thing that made me excited yesterday was I thought there were a lot of issues that were really about motivation. And I'm a motivation researcher. That's my alley. And that's what I'm hoping to talk about today. So one question that came up is, how do we attract Swedish-speaking Finns back home to Finland? I didn't even know that there were Swedish-speaking Finns, but it was fascinating to realize that the same problem that English Quebecers might have in terms of their talented young people moving to Toronto is also faced in Finland by the Swedish speakers. And then I was also struck by the motivational questions that are, I think, behind why Anglophone students in healthcare fields decide to leave or decide to stay. And so I really think that motivation is relevant to a lot of what all of you are interested in. I think my main contribution, or the best thing I could do, is to tell you about a grand motivational theory that I've been working with since I was a graduate student 40 years ago. Only the tippy top of this theory was available at that time, but it's been building and growing. And I think it's the most influential, empirically supported motivational theory of the 21st century. That maybe could be argued, but the theory I'll tell you about is called self-determination theory. And the first question I'll try to address in this talk is what it is and why it's relevant to healthcare professionals, why it's relevant to people who are concerned about language minorities. I'll also, as a second question, is to talk about how we can motivate our patients, our families, our communities to internalize and follow through on healthcare recommendations. Because as all of you know, the real problem in the area of healthcare is that, well, one problem is patients won't come to us. Second problem is if they do come to us, and if we accurately diagnose their problems, and we give them a prescription, either some medicine or a behavioral prescription, what all of us learn very quickly is that more than half the people won't follow through and carry out the prescription as we recommended. And they also may not tell us exactly what they've done. And then it gets very hard to figure out how to help them. So at its heart, I think a health professional's role is not only diagnosing, not only providing information, but being deeply interested in what happens to that information, whether it gets internalized, whether the patient owns it, and whether the patient has the kind of motivation that will allow them to move forward and carry out what you've recommended. So self-determination theory, this is the magnum opus over here on the right side. It came out a couple of years ago. It's an outstanding summary of this theory and how it's been applied. There's also an outstanding website that I provide. Now, let me just, there's something blocking my view here. So self-determination theory as a framework, it's fundamentally concerned with why we do what we do. So in our everyday lives, the way we usually find motivation is by setting a personal goal. And self-determination theory would be interested in why we set the goals that we do. And what it's most interested in is not how much motivation you have, let's say to start exercising. It's more interested in the quality of the motivation or the type of the motivation. Did you set the resolution to start exercising because your partner has been commenting on your flabby demeanor? Did you set it because you've been inspired by some friends who've really gotten fit and strong? Did you set it because your doctor told you you have to do this, otherwise you're going to have to go on medicine? And those kinds of motivations are different, and they're different along a continuum from feeling controlled and pressured to feeling more autonomous. So in my talk today, I'll give you practical health examples from our lives, but I've also started doing community research thanks to HCOM and thanks to Koestner. And it's really revitalized how I think about a lot of these things. So I'll be giving community examples. Now, the reason I'm giving this talk is because by chance, I was lucky enough to go to the University of Rochester in 1978 as an undergraduate, when two of the most brilliant psychologists had just gotten together and began developing the theory I'll tell you about. So everything I'm telling you is part of the vision of Rich Ryan and Ed Deasy. And now there's about 1,000 researchers across the globe who are working on this framework. Okay, let me begin then. So the theory is humanistic and it's organismic. And it begins with the assumption that all humans have three basic psychological needs. And just like a plant needs sunlight, it needs water, and it needs some nutriments in order to grow and develop, to live long, humans need to have the needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence satisfied in their everyday lives and in the various settings in which they live their lives. So I'll define all of these and you'll get a sense of what this is. Now, autonomy is what this theory is most famous for because we focus on this, whereas many other motivation theories don't really hide it or they get it wrong. Autonomy has to do with feeling choiceful, feeling authentic, feeling like your behavior reflects your own values and your own interests. It mostly has to do with feeling like you are the author of your own actions, your own goals, and your own life. Relatedness, many theories focus on relatedness. Usually they're called attachment theories. And self-determination theory would say, in addition to autonomy, there's a basic essential need for relatedness, which means that others care for you and you care for them in return. And you have the experience of I matter to someone. Everyone doesn't have to like you, but a meaningful number you have to feel like you, care about you, and that you do the same toward them. Now, the final need, and I think many of us, especially if we're professors or students, really focus on this one a lot, and I'll say more about that. And that's the need for competence. In our everyday lives, we need to feel like we can do things well and that we're improving. And we don't have to be excellent like right now, but what's important is to feel like we can learn to do things better. So there's three needs: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. The mnemonic I recommend is ARC, because autonomy comes first, then it's relatedness, and then it's competence. And at a basic level, the theory suggests that the arc of your school experience, your work experience, your healthcare experience will be determined by whether your needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence are satisfied versus frustrated when you're at school, when you're at work, when you're beginning on a new career. So I'll give you two examples. My daughter, she's 20 years old and she started at McGill. She's a U1 student and she's studying in social work. I was really excited because I thought I was going to save a lot of money because Sophie's going to my university. It turns out I saved like $600. It wasn't as good a deal as I expected. Now, Sophie really enjoyed SAGEP, but when she got to McGill, she actually decided to live in the dorms, and she found that hard, so that her need for relatedness, I don't think, was very satisfied. And then her need for autonomy, unfortunately, uh, she couldn't get into many of the courses she wanted to get into. And she ended up taking some that she didn't want to take. So she didn't really have a sense that her choices were being honored or that she could pursue what she was interested in. And then in terms of competence, something that I didn't know is that the social work program has a lot of students who did extended SAGEP degrees and then who practiced. So Sophie felt like, boy, everyone else knows more than she does, and they're more ready. So the arc of Sophie's first semester wasn't heading in the right direction. She was feeling controlled instead of autonomous, unconnected instead of connected, and she was feeling incompetent. Fortunately, she found a way to turn it around. And I was really happy. And now she's enjoying the program. And the first year of university, especially coming out of a pandemic, is going to be tough. Now, I'll give you one other example, a community example. I've been fortunate to be working with the Black Community Resource Center for the last year, and we focused on the particular challenges of Black young adults, English-speaking Black young adults, in coping and managing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you think about Black young adults over the last 2 years, you of course know that Black communities have been hit especially hard and that they've struggled to protect themselves from the pandemic. And it's very likely that many young people in the Black community felt like their need for relatedness has been constrained because we had to shelter at home. Their need for competence may have been impacted because they couldn't do a lot of their activities. And generally, you would have to guess it was a more difficult time. Now, I think there's something that made it even more difficult, which is that there's a lot of issues in Quebec right now around race and around language. And many of those issues probably make young adult Black people and other Black people feel like their autonomy, relatedness, and competence aren't being supported in many areas of their lives. Now, the final thing I want to say about this little symbol I have here, so it's the ARC, which are the three needs, but I put an arrow between autonomy and relatedness. I think these two are almost always connected. Think of yourself becoming autonomous when you were little. Your development of autonomy was very tied into your connection and attachment to your parents. I think in our lives, there's a very strong connection between autonomy and relatedness, and I'll say more about that. Okay, so there's the three needs, autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And then you have to consider whether the settings in which you operate will be supporting that. So is your autonomy supported? Do people give you choice? Do they let you initiate? Is your relatedness encouraged? Are people empathic? Do they take your perspective? And is competence supported? Do people give you some structures? Do they provide scaffolding? And to the extent that you are getting that support for autonomy, relatedness, and competence, the expectation is you'll have strong positive motivation, you'll be growing and developing in your capacities, and you'll maintain your wellness. Now, I'm a little behind, so I'll skip ahead a bit. So that's the theory. And the place in which I've really focused on this theory is in the area of setting personal goals. And I've done this with a PhD student who's now at NYU doing a postdoc named Ann Holding. So I've spent 20 years really zooming in on why we set goals, how we set goals, and why we fail so often. If you don't believe that we fail often, I would ask you to think back to the last New Year's resolution you set. So we've done this in a pretty systematic way. We developed our own paradigm. We call it the personal goal paradigm. We select a time of the year where people are likely to set goals. They could be university students, they could be community adults, they could be patients in treatment. We ask them to generate 3 important personal goals, and then we follow up across 5 or 6 waves to see whether people are making progress and to link that progress to the kinds of motivation they have and the kinds of support they're getting. Here are some examples of the kinds of goals people offer in our studies. So university students, they're pretty stereotypic. They're about, studying, doing better, but there is some variety. Some people will include more social goals. The adult goals, we only asked for 2. What was striking is that adults they're much more likely to set health goals. In fact, if you look at New Year's resolutions year after year, the three goals that people set, if they're adults, are always the most popular: to quit smoking, to, to go on a diet or to eat less, and then to exercise more. And those are important, meaningful goals. If all of us did those three things, we would improve the health of our lives dramatically. Now, when we did these studies, right away, an important and I think surprising finding emerged. We're asking people to tell us their personal goals related to school, related to their relationships, related to their health. The first finding that we made was that many of the goals were not really personal. They didn't seem to be coming from something the person wanted to do or really valued. Instead, a lot of the goals we have are things that we feel we should be doing or that others have told us to do. And the irony there is that the goal is self-generated, but often it's not self-endorsed. Now, how do I know that? Well, we have a way of asking people for each goal, to what extent are you pursuing this goal for these reasons? And the first set of reasons we call autonomous. So it could be fun and enjoyment. That's a great reason. Problem with that is health goals, almost never do you feel like, boy, I'm going to take my medicine because of the fun and enjoyment, or I'm going to. So instead of intrinsic motivation, which that captures, the questions we ask about, do you believe it's important and valuable, and does it represent who you are? Those are still like truly personal autonomous goals. The problem is, more often than not, people will say they have controlled reasons. Now, autonomy is about a sense of ownership and personal endorsement. It means you have a health goal that you really want to do instead of having to do. It means that you endorse this goal wholeheartedly instead of half-heartedly. And it's really important for each goal we select to kind of assess to what extent is it autonomous or controlled. The reason it's important is that in study after study, we've been able to show that you only make progress at goals where you feel autonomous. That's true whether you're talking about progress on tasks over the weekend. It's true with school academic progress over a year. It's true if you're in a weight loss program with your partner and they weigh you every 3 months. And it's true in treatment for depression. The more autonomous your goal is, rather than feeling controlled, the more likely you are to make progress. Why do autonomous goals help? Mostly because the number one problem we face is that pursuing a goal requires self-control resources. And there's a lot of evidence that self-control resources are limited and that we usually hit our limit around this time of the day. 2 o'clock, our self-control is gone. That's an exaggeration. But the reality is that our lives are so busy, so complicated. There are so many goals, including many controlling goals that we have to pursue every day, that we end up using most of our self-control resources. And in fact, most of the time we max out. And that's why we can't follow a New Year's resolution. Half the people who set a New Year's resolution give up within 2 months. At the end of a year, only about 5% have succeeded. And it's not because we're lazy, non-conscientious people. It's because we're incredibly busy, loaded down people. And what I've been able to show, and my colleagues, is that when you are careful about the goals you select, and if you select goals where you feel like this is interesting, this is meaningful, This is personally valuable. And if you're careful to reduce the feelings of control and pressure, you are far more likely to reach that goal. And then you'll feel much better about your goal pursuits in your life. I'm going to skip this. My mom is a good example of this. She's been able to start exercising. She uses hiking clubs, hiking poles, and she walks outside for an hour a day. It's something a doctor recommended. She balked at it. She said, "Are you crazy? Hiking poles? I can't do that." But my daughter, not my daughter, my sister and her husband got her the poles, showed her how to do it. She lives in Rochester, New York, and when the snow came, she realized she couldn't hike anymore. So she actually agreed to buy a treadmill, and she has a treadmill in her basement, and she uses the treadmill. She doesn't use the hiking poles there. She just holds on the side. But do you know how many of us have invested in exercise equipment and have never used it? And my mom uses it 3 or 4 times a week. I think she has autonomous motivation, and she also got autonomy support. Okay, so the first secret about goals and motivation is that our motivation is often not the right kind. It's controlled, and it really needs to be autonomous. We have to wholeheartedly endorse the things we're trying to do. And that's especially true in healthcare. The second secret is that every goal we have is shared with other people. All of our personal goals are actually interpersonal. And sometimes, we actually will pursue a goal. I've done this where I wanted to do a triathlon when I was 40, and I did it with 2 friends. And doing it with friends makes it easier, it makes it more fun. It also reminds you, and it makes it more meaningful. But even if your friends aren't pursuing the goal, I can bet that any of your close friends and family members could tell me what goals you care about. And they probably check in with you. So if you're going on a new diet, your friends know. You've probably talked to them. They probably suggested it. And there's a lot of evidence that it's natural to share our goals and goal pursuit with other people. And it's actually healthy and adaptive because it's one of the ways that we can outsource some of the self-control demands. Now, this is where I focused for the last 10 years. And because I noticed that most of us, when we try to provide support for other people's goals, we do it in a certain kind of way that I don't think is ideal. It's not bad, but we try to be cheerleaders and problem solvers. So we're like coaches, but we're kind of directive coaches. And so we assess in our studies who are the 2 people who know about your goals and who are trying to support. One surprise with university students, the first person is almost always their mom. They rarely choose the dad, and friends only come second or third. But who knows about your goals and supporting you? And then we say, how are they doing it? To what extent do they help you problem solve about the goal? To what extent do they remind you of the goal? To what extent do they cheerlead? That is directive support, and I think that's what comes most naturally to all of us. There's another kind of support, and health research already indicated that this is the support that is helpful to most of us. It's a more invisible kind of support. We call it autonomous support, and what it mostly is someone in your life who cares about you and wants you to succeed, tries to understand what you're doing. They show empathy, they take your perspective. So they spend a lot of time listening. They ask questions so that they can really understand how you're trying to do what you're doing. And the other thing they do is they stop themselves from intruding and telling you how you should be pursuing your personal goal. They have a sense of boundary. They're really interested. They want to know about it, but they don't act as if it's their goal, not your goal. So we can measure that, but before I show you the results, I'll give you a personal example of what we should not do. 10 years ago, my wife, at that time, I guess she was around 50 probably. I'm 60. No, she was a little younger. But she had really liked running when she was in SAGEP and for a couple of years after. And she decided she wanted to do that for exercise. My wife is very methodical and very careful about everything she does. So she researched how to begin running and she found a program. I thought it was a very detailed, complicated program. It was 10 weeks to get you to the point where you could run 20 minutes continuously. My suggestion would have been just go outside and run for 20 minutes. But my wife, and she had realistic concerns about hurting her knees and building up to it. She followed this plan. 1 minute run, 2 minute walk. You do it 7 times the first week. 2 minute run, 2 minute walk, 5 times the second week. 3 minute run, 2 minute walk, 4 times. It goes so on. It's always 20 minutes, but it's a run walk plan. I right away said, Helen, that's really pretty complicated and detailed. Maybe you could simplify it. And she says, no, I'm going to do it. And she did it for about 4 weeks. And then life happened. We both got sick and she didn't do it for 2 weeks. And then she did go back to it, but she started at week 1. And I said, oh, Helen, you can't go back to week 1. You have to be like a shark. You always have to be swimming forward. You can't rest or go back. And I thought I was being helpful, but that's directive support. What I should have said is, boy, that's so tough, Helen, tell me about why you want to go back. Oh, I could see that. You're worried about your knees. Yeah, that sounds great. And had I done that, my wife might be running now 10 years later. She's quickly stopped running after I gave her the support. And in our studies, we realized this is often how it goes. The directive support kind of stops people in their tracks sometimes. More often, it has no positive or negative effect. In some cases, like if it's a parent or a boyfriend, it backfires and it's disastrous, or if it's a husband. But usually if it's a friend and if they're not invested in your goal, it just is neutral. But the autonomy support is really helpful. Study after study, you make greater progress, there's better well-being, and your relationship is better. It's great to have someone who listens and shows interest instead of having someone who tells you that you have to be like a shark. Now, very recently in our weight loss studies, and using not self-report measures, but using objective measures and videotapes, what we have found is autonomy support also benefits the person who's giving the support, that it kind of redounds back and improves their motivation, so it becomes more autonomous. And in this area of research, a lot of the studies focus on health outcomes. And there's kind of a model that has been confirmed time and time again, where it begins with autonomy support, which leads to more autonomous motivation, and that leads to positive health outcomes, physical and psychological. I've done some of these studies. There's a meta-analysis with 200 data sets. There's some randomized control studies, very reliable and convincing. Now, I've added something to this. So my student, Shelby Levine's done some studies where she shows it doesn't only go from autonomy support to autonomous motivation, but it's a dynamic reciprocal pattern where it begins with autonomous motivation. So if I'm more autonomous, my wife, my daughter, my friend are more likely to give me autonomy support. That makes me even more autonomous. That elicits even more autonomy support, and the cycle continues. And all along the cycle, there's more positive affect and more goal progress. So it's actually a collaborative phenomenon where it's the way you behave and then the way others respond. And the critical ingredient is the display of autonomy and the support of that display. We've also shown that certain personality traits make this more possible. If you, there's two big five traits which indicate social maturity. All of you have it, I'm sure. You're probably high on agreeableness and conscientiousness. Agreeableness is about being a warm mensch. It's not really about being a yes person. Conscientious is, you know what it is. If you're in a secure attachment, you're more likely to be act autonomously and to receive autonomy support. So I think all of that's interesting. It shows you the value of the of self-determination theory and also of this collaborative autonomy. But about 2 years ago, I'll finish up in about 5 minutes or so, I did a personal experiment which has really changed my work life. When the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, I was taken aback. I was taken aback yesterday again when I hear we're scheduled for another surge. So we're going to have our fifth wave. But I'm usually a shy, reserved, introverted kind of professor. Many of us are. But for some reason, I was like George Costanza. I said, I'm going to do the opposite. And I made a vow to myself, April 1st, 2020, that I was going to say yes to every request to talk about motivation or to help someone in their work on motivation. And I've held true to that. And my life changed because first I started talking to McGill audiences. And then I spoke to alumni. And one of the alumni I spoke to was working at the Black Community Resource Center. And she was very concerned about the Black community and the pandemic, and she wanted to meet with them. And I did. And I've begun to do community research, and we have a great partnership. But I said yes to other things. The Suzuki Music Society phoned me and asked how to keep up the motivation for being a 5-year-old pianist when during a pandemic. UCAM asked me to talk to their psychology department. Concordia asked me to talk to their academic counselors. It's very hard to counsel 20-year-olds who are locked up in their parents' home. The Gazette phoned me to talk because they wanted to do a series of articles. That was done by Susan Schwartz. She should be a psychologist. Those were great. CBC Noon Radio called me, and I've spoken I've been a guest 4 times, each of the waves, and I just got a call earlier to do the 12 noon show tomorrow about the 5th wave. I've been doing, this has really been interesting. The Jamaica Association's organized open houses about vaccination, how to encourage it in Black communities. My lab and I have had a workshop on motivational interviewing, on stages of change. We focused a lot on hesitancy and resistance. And it's just been so much more meaningful and interesting than the predominantly basic research I did for 30 years. And I at least had a good important theory that I was working with. I don't know how other basic researchers stay motivated because a lot of the research is so far removed. Now, let me tell you about a couple of the studies. I won't belabor them. But the first one, which you can find at the Koestner website, there's actually a 20-minute video, and I think I did a good job in that one. So you could just watch the video. And it was called From Despair to Hope. And I began working with the Black Community Resource Center, thinking that we'd focus on kind of the terrible psychological impacts that the COVID pandemic was having on young people. I mean, I was surprised that the young people were most affected in terms of anxiety and depression. And this was strikingly true among young Black people. So we began doing that, but it was collaborative, and we met like 6 or 7 times. And while we were meeting, George Floyd was killed, and the Black Lives Matters movement began again. And it quickly reached Montreal, and it became an amazing thing. Now, it's really sad that this was necessary, and it's really sad that while the movement was going on, there were more young Black people who were being killed by police. But the way young Black people, and then many other visible minorities, and then also young white people, they mobilized to try to do something about it. And even though it was frustrating and fatiguing to see this happening, our hunch was that there was something energizing and mobilizing, and that the young people somehow, in some way, may have been able to emerge from like the Groundhog Day phenomenon of just being mired in this sheltering at home, worrying about COVID all the time. And in fact, we did a longitudinal study. Koestner funded us, and we were able to show that Black young adults were able, to some extent, to transform their experience and to recover because of the Black Lives Matters movement. Now, the other interesting thing, and this is so important, I think, for people here today, you're concerned about minority language groups, minority racial and ethnic groups. What we did is we not only measured personal autonomy, we measured perceptions of your group's autonomy. So we measured the extent to which Black young people felt like other groups and the larger society were allowing them to fully participate in Quebec life. We're allowing them to get access to all of the information about COVID in a way that they could easily comprehend it. And what we found, and this surprised us, and we found it again though, we found it 3 times now, is that for young adult Black people, what mattered most was their perception of whether the Black community was being supported in their autonomy and their competence and their connectedness. And that overrode, we didn't find any effect for personal autonomy. It was really more important how you felt your group was doing. And I think that's because it's a tight-knit group and it's an endangered group. And that would suggest that one of the ways in which to reach the Black community, for example, regarding vaccination, is to focus on how autonomy isn't all about me. It's not about independence, self-reliance. We are social animals. Our species is designed to live in small groups and to function harmoniously. We get along. We also want to get ahead, but mostly in the interest of the group. So what I learned from some of the other groups I work with is that in the Black community, there's a strong focus on communalism, familism, and there's a notion that the we is more important than the me. And it's been a struggle because the Black community is more distrustful of health authorities. So they worry when there's a new vaccine. And what I've learned is that this distrust is not just historic, it's a present reality. So that almost every Black young adult has a family member who's gone to the emergency room and experienced what they sensed was neglect or sometimes active discrimination. So there's kind of a barrier. But I think that explains why for young adult Blacks in Quebec, English speaking especially, it's how you feel your group is doing. Okay, so the second thing I'll tell you about is that we, because of the wonderful infusion of funding from HCOM, thank you so much, we were able to focus on kind of comparing English-speaking Black Quebecers and French-speaking Black Quebecers and how they were adapting to the healthcare access difficulties. Now, something I've learned is that unfortunately, I don't think there's too tight of a connection, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong about this, between the French and English speaking communities. It's probably like between the French and English speaking white communities, there's not. But the problem for the English speaking Quebec Black communities is that they may feel like a double minority. So it's an intersectional issue where they may feel like they're more subject to discrimination because of their race, but also because of their language. And they may also feel like there's some systemic things that make it harder for them to learn about health problems, to get access to solutions, and then to get access to kind of the problems that have been pushed aside and that should be addressed later. So we did a pretty simple study. This was actually done by the BCRC. It was their Black in Quebec project. Myself and my student Anne collaborated. And we found that there are striking differences. Because of this conference, I've learned that minority language differences are common. And it's probably even common among minority racial groups or ethnic groups. But the English-speaking Quebecers perceived more discrimination. They reported less healthcare access. They also reported that in their interactions with medical professionals, they experienced less autonomy support, less listening, less asking if they had any ideas, less encouragement like that than did the French speaking. And they were also significantly less satisfied with their health care. Okay, so I think that's relevant to many of the things we're talking about. And I think it illustrates the way, a useful motivational theory can probably help many of us. So I tried to talk about why self-determination theory is useful. I'm happy to send you, don't tell anyone this, don't tell the publishers, I can send you the SDT book. I have it as an electronic copy and you could download like the chapters you're interested in. I have an outstanding chapter that Ann Holding wrote about this goal setting work. I encourage you to go to the website. And I just want to tell all of you, I would be delighted to collaborate. I'm George Costanza. I'm doing the opposite of what I used to do. I'm no longer an ivory tower basic researcher. I am someone who actually cares about being part of the English speaking community. I'm part of this minority. And if motivation is something you're interested in, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koestner. This was very enlightening, and we can see a lot of different ramification to the work you're doing in the interaction between the race and language, and so there are definitely key questions that will be put forward, and I encourage people to put it in the chat, and we're going to take note of this. So unfortunately, we have to kind of conclude,
That's no
uh,
problem.
but
People should just send me an email if they have questions.
sure, definitely. And we'll also, at Dialogue McGill, will also take note of those questions and definitely look forward more collaboration with you. So thank you again for your generous talk today. And I just want to make the announcement that we had 4 independent assessors of all the posters that were presented today. And my pleasure is to announce that the award for best poster was given to poster number 6, The Benefits of Autonomy Support for the Healthcare Needs of Black Language Minorities in Quebec. So the authors are David, Fang, Lafrenière, and Koestner. So congratulations, Dr. Koestner and your team.
Thanks.
That's news to you, right? You had no
Yeah, it
idea.
was not rigged. It was not a condition for me coming here.
That's right. We took a chance by inviting you. So no, I'm just kidding you. We're very happy. So congratulations. Congratulations to all the poster presenters. It was really, I attended a few and they were very great posters. So congratulations to all. Would like to acknowledge again, Dialogue McGill's funding sponsors, Santé Canada et le Bureau d'appui aux communautés de langue officielle. So as we said earlier, next conference will be in early 2023. So Dialogue McGill is looking forward through the survey that the link that we've distributed to have you input some of the topics you'd like us to attend. And very, very grateful for all the participants, including Health Canada representative, M3S Secretariat, Health and Social Service Institution, community networks, educational institution, and many other Quebec-based partner organizations. So again, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed those 2 half days. We surely did, and we've learned a lot from you. So thank you again. And thank you to our distinguished presenters. Have a great afternoon and a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Bye.